Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we're talking about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Supergirl. So in this episode, dealt heavily with the Luthors, like a lot of stuff revolving around the Luthors. Lena learning a lot of stuff about herself, finding out the fact is that she isn't 100% adopted, which she was, but it's because her dad Lionel had an affair, so she's half Luthor. Something that she all didn't know, which kind of coincides. Like a lot of stuff in this episode kind of reflected Smallville. I've said it before, and it's just like it's so interesting that they've built it in a way that's like if you watch Smallville, which obviously if you don't know, like I went back and rewatched all of Smallville, like was that last year or back in 2015? I don't remember. So obviously a lot of Smallville is fresher on my mind. Obviously I kept bringing up comparisons. I'm sure I've done it earlier this season, but also I did it quite a bit last season, kind of bringing up comparisons to Smallville. But it seems like they really cleverly built this in a way that it's like, oh, if you saw Smallville, think of this as an unofficial continuation, because that's kind of what Tess's whole situation was about. She was an adopted daughter, but she was actually like, Lionel had an affair or whatever, so Tess was his, half daughter. It seems like the same thing applies to Lena in this situation. Also, the whole like storyline of Lex and Clark being best friends, also a thing in this, which I think maybe it's a situation that's popped up in other comic books, but definitely Smallville was like my first experience where it's like, oh, Lex and Clark are best friends. That's kind of one of the most interesting aspects, I think, amongst villains and heroes. Like that's the most interesting take on a relationship, I think. I mean, to me, the equivalent would be like, oh, Batman and Joker being friends, which, kind of trailing off here a bit, I do apologize, is Telltale's Batman kind of brings that up to a certain extent, which I really appreciate that. It's like two mortal enemies, like, their destiny is to be the ultimate enemies, and to find out, like, oh, they're being a little buddy-buddy. That's what kind of made the whole Lex and Clark situation really stand out. The whole reason why that kind of got brought up because I was like, oh, Lillian escaped because Metello got some kryptonite, was able to break free and took her with her. And everyone is like, oh, obviously Lena's the one that broke her out and delivered Metello the kryptonite, because the only person that visited Lillian was Lena. Which sucks because the only reason why Lena was there in the first place is because Kara kind of was like, yo, talk to your mom. It's like, yeah, your mom might have done some evil stuff, but it's like, I would give anything to talk to my parents. Your parent is still alive, so at the very least talk to her. And it's sad because the whole situation was like, oh yeah, like it gets sadder and sadder because her mom just manipulated her the entire episode. The whole point of getting Lena to show up was just so that she could use Lena as a scapegoat to be like, oh, Lena helped me out. Oh, now you and me are the same. We're on the run. We're both criminals. So it's like she complains like, oh, everything I'm doing is I'm love. It's like, oh, the fact is that me and your father were distant. I kept my distance from you. I latched on to Lex because your dad was so like, oh, shameful about what he did because you were a constant reminder. So you and me could never be close. So I, latched on to Lex, and obviously he latched on to you, but it's like, oh, it broke my heart seeing you every time because like, oh, you're still my daughter and stuff like that. And the fact is that, oh, second chances, don't we all deserve one? And it's like, with your second chance, you screw over your daughter. I mean, really, even she admits later on, it's like, oh, there's no second chance. It's like, the fact of the matter is, I'm doing good for this world, which is also something I was kind of interested in. Maybe I didn't catch that the first time. I didn't realize Metello was Corbin, prior to becoming Metello, was such a heavy believer in what Lillian was doing, because he was on stand being like, oh no, she's doing the right thing. She's out there you're trying to punish a woman for doing the right thing. She's trying to protect all of you. And just see Lillian with that kind of, just that smile on her face, that conceited smile of like, oh, I know what's going on, about to happen. It's like, oh yeah, kind of tell them the truth, Metello. It's like, so I was, because at first I thought he was just a hired gun, which I think he was, but maybe he slowly got indoctrinated. I was like, maybe they did something to him, or maybe it's like, because it's his freedoms that cost here, and because she's going out of her way to help him, it's like, oh, obviously he's going to side with her. But it's like, no, he wholeheartedly believes everything. But she's like, oh, the fact is, you're my daughter and everything, and I'm doing this for your sake because, because I love you and everything. It's like, you're so full of crap. You've manipulated her. You've turned everyone against her. She's like, oh, the only reason why, basically the whole thing was also to show her a point. Like, the fact is, you really didn't help me. You're innocent in all this, but the narrative easily, with a little doctored evidence here and there, some very good doctored evidence that no one would be able to, like, easily see through, which luckily later on Wynn was able to. But it's like, dude, everyone was against Lena. She's like, oh, it fits the narrative. You are a Luthor and all. So it's like, no matter where you go and what you do, you will always have that name with you. And, people always fit the narrative of assuming you're the worst. I mean, look at your brother Lex. He's betrayed by Superman. And she's like, Lex was insane. She's like, well, yeah, of course. The fact of the matter is, that's what happens when a bright light, a brilliant light like his is driven insane by all these other people around him. It's like, dude, holy crap. She even went as far as saying like, oh, we're the only Luthors left. It's like, at that point, it's like, it's hard to say where your mind is, because it's like, you said something like that. We know Lex isn't dead. He's just locked up. But at the same time, I guess it was kind of we're the only Luthors in contact. It's like, does she not visit Lex at all? I mean, maybe Lex is kind of in some Max stuff put away. I mean, he has, like, obviously we don't know everything. Obviously, like, the first 2 episodes or so kind of brought up the fact that he's done a lot of dangerous stuff, earthquakes and related stuff like that, just in his need to kind of wipe out aliens and stuff like that. But kind of brought it up earlier, the whole Lex and Clark situation, is because the person that doesn't trust Lena the most is Jimmy, because he was like, and for him it's kind of a pride thing, because it's like, you trust her so wholeheartedly. You don't really know her that well, but you don't trust me. You kind of look down on me in this whole guardian situation. She's like, I'm trying to protect you. He's like, I don't need you to protect me. I can protect myself, which he did pretty good in that fight against Metallo. That was pretty sick. I mean, he got hurt and everything, but he kind of held his own, so that was pretty impressive. But he's the one that brought up the fact is that it's like, Clark was blind to all of Lex's flaws. Everyone telling him this and that. So obviously he's like, the fact is, he doesn't want the same thing to happen to Kara. He doesn't want her to get so close to Lena that she ends up getting betrayed, because it's like, that literally happened to Clark. Everyone kept wondering, oh, he's a Luthor, but Clark didn't want to listen about Lex until it was kind of too late. So until he kind of saw Lex for who he really was. But, you have Kara trying to defend Lena, be like, she's not like that. You even have Jimmy going as far as being like, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. Maybe even turning her mom in was all part of some plan or something. Maybe she shot Corbin so that her mom could eventually run tests on him and create him into Metallo, which is like, that's some deep level conspiracy theories. But granted, because he was Clark's best friend and he saw the damage and danger that Lex presented in calls, obviously he has the biggest biased opinion. I mean, we really don't know much about Kara's opinion on Lex, because that never really came up in conversation. But because something that came up in this episode later on, when it was all said and done, Lena brought up the fact is that, hey, I never really had a friend outside of like everyone she's working with, whether it's Jimmy, Wynn, everyone at the DEO. Yes, they're like a family to her, but like outside of them, does Kara actually have any non-work friends? I don't think she does. Lena, I think not only is Kara Lena's only friend, I think, like I said, she's not her only friend, but when you actually think of it, like, there's work friends, and obviously, her work friends are her outside friends as well, but at the same time, it's like, this is probably her first time that she's ever really 100% made a friend. I mean, at the very least, we don't see that many, like, the only people that Kara hangs around are people who are connected both to her personal life and her work life, that being Supergirl, who are on the end and to know about every aspect of her life. Lena's the only person that she's friends with that doesn't know everything. It's kind of like, that's kind of the first time she's had an outside friend, in my opinion, that doesn't know about everything. I mean, obviously, Wynn only knows about everything because she brought him in last season, but obviously, Jimmy knows everything because it's like, well, he's Jimmy, so, it's close to Clark, so he knows everything that goes down, so obviously he knows who Kara is, so. But that was just that to me was kind of an interesting thing, because it is legitimately Supergirl setting up that dynamic of a Luthor and a member of the House of L. I guess that's the best way to put it, or being buddy. And because the thing is kind of going back to that being how crappy her mom is, her mom kind of forced her to kind of open up, basically because Lex has all these vaults scattered across the world with all these different weapons and stuff used to fight, Superman and aliens. But she kind of forced Lena, because Lena was like, I'm not going to do this, because she was like, the fact of the matter is you brought me here because only a Luthor can open it. So it's like, oh, she's like, I'm surprised you don't have some DNA of Lex just laying around. But it's like, no, that's the real reason why you broke me out. She's like, well, yeah, it played part of the reason, but it's also because I love you. It's like, blah, 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 blah. Especially when the time came when Kara showed up and it's like, yo, Metallo's about to explode because the kryptonite that you made for him, the synthetic, is very unstable and it's about to explode. Lillian didn't want to listen. obviously, and she's thinking it's some kind of trick. But that didn't stop her later on when they were getting into the fight. Her and Hank, Cyber Superman, left, leaving Lena behind, even though you're like, oh, that's not going to explode. Like, oh, you claim to love your daughter and everything. And it's like, oh, you sure as hell left her behind. Because even if you didn't 100% believe that being a possibility that, Mattel would explode, that still should have been a situation where it's like, you had time to drag your daughter away, but you didn't. You left her to die, you sad sack of crap. And I'm sure Lena's definitely going to hold that against her. Even Corbin, she was trying her best, being the optimist and trying to save everyone. She's like, Corbin, listen to me. That's going to blow up. You need to get rid of it. He's like, I'm not buying that. Just because, like I say, it's so caught up in its own hate, just kind of the same way as Lillian. It's like, you want to demonize other people, but at the same time, you're not even willing to look at what you're done, what you're capable of. It's like, you claim aliens to be monsters, which, like I said, there are some legitimate monsters out there, but as we've seen in this show, there are plenty of humans. Let's take Roulette, for example, who are terrible monsters of their own. So, there's, you might look at someone like Magan, like as a white Martian, like, oh, she's a monster. It's like, yeah, when you look at her people, most of her people, kind of monsters. But then when you look at her, she's an exception because she's a very kind-hearted person that tried to do her best and agree with the tactics her people doing. So it's an example of like, oh, you assume the worst in people. It's like, you want to assume the worst in aliens. It's like, the fact of the matter is you have terrible people on Earth. I don't see you doing the same thing of trying to wipe them out like you are all aliens. It's like, where do you draw the line on evil? It's like, oh, evil is only good as long as it's human evil. Human evil is something we can handle. Alien evil is unpredictable. It's like, human nature is unpredictable. The fact of the matter is, like, take Lex, for example. Sure, a lot of people are like, oh, he's a bright star, genius, he's going to go off and do great things. But it's like, no, he went off and became a supervillain. So it's kind of like, you can't blame Clark for that. Like, just, it seems like it's part of the Luthor gene. And I'm scared and afraid that it's going to be something that happens to Lena, especially going forward. I mean, hopefully this experience will, obviously she's going to be reluctant to ever trust her mom again. But her mom did say, no matter what, I am your mother. So, I mean, technically she isn't. She isn't her biological mom, but she did help raise her and everything. Even though she was distant, she was still there, and even though she's a bit critical and everything, you get the point. I am very curious to find out more about her mom's situation and about Lionel's situation, where, like, how everything played out for them. Also, since we did get a Superman this season, it does make you wonder, will we get a Lex? I feel like it only makes sense. So maybe it's a situation where he might not be cast this season, but eventually they will. I'm also curious because, like I said, there's a lot of stuff that was brought up season 1 that has not come up yet. So maybe it's something that's not, like the whole Max Lord situation, like stuff like Red Tornado, all of that was established on, when it was on the CBS. But maybe, maybe the CW is like, those elements are rocky. Let's completely drop them and kind of, bring some of those elements, sure, but the fact is we gotta kind of cut off some of the fat and kind of make it so a little more bulky and muscular and like stronger in these particular areas. I don't know where I was necessarily going with that analogy. So I apologize. That was like all over the place. But just the look on Lena's face at the end and just seeing the chest piece and the fact that she held up a knight, to me in my brain, I was like, is that supposed to represent, that right there, that scene could obviously, her reflecting on her childhood and everything, her mom kind of teaching her, Lillian teaching her how to be more, Luthor-like, essentially, being very tactical. And the fact is that, kind of raising her to a certain extent, even at such a young age, teaching her to be the smart person that she is. And, but like I said, at the same time, it could be a situation where it's like, you could look at it as being like, oh, that knight piece could be Kara, because it could be like, oh, eventually later on down the road, she might look at Kara as nothing more than a chess piece. That the fact is, it's like, that's, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But in a circumstance like this, it's like, why not keep your friends even closer, because they can act as a shield for you. So, like, I don't know. I hope on everything she doesn't go, but obviously you can obviously see that, like I brought it up before, the parallels between her, Kara, and Lena, and Lex and Clark. So hopefully it doesn't go down that route, but it just might. Another thing that popped up this episode, kind of a romancing element, was the whole Mon-El situation. Because at first Mon-El's kind of like, oh yeah, me and Eve, we're having so much fun, we're dating, it's good, but things obviously between him and Kara, it's like, oh yeah, because Kara kept asking us like, it's so obvious you really, how you feel about him, because you keep asking, because it's like, you ask both Mon-El as well as Eve, but she got a little more information from Eve. It turns out that Eve and Mike have only been on one date, and that was that one date. Obviously Kara saw them going on, but the entire date he did something wrong, and then she started pointing out stuff like, "Oh man, was he chewing with his mouth open? Did he tell those stupid jokes or something?" Which right there kind of shows you a sign. The fact of the matter is how much time you spend with him. If you're able to know these like small, like little flaw things that he does, I'm surprised Eve didn't point out. I was like, "Oh, you know so much about the bad things he do, don't he?" Like obviously she's pointing out negative stuff, but the fact of the matter is, for you to pick up on that, something like that means that it has to be someone that you spend enough time around. Which she spent quite a bit of time around on own, but it turns out during their date, Monel, all he did was talk about Kara. And he was like, the fact is, you need to get over your ex-girlfriend. And you have Kara be like, what? No, we never dated. And she's like, Mike told me the same thing. And then it came down to a conversation when, because, Kara was still pissed about the whole Lena situation. And she was around, like, down below in the training area, like, punching and kicking some large cement blocks like a boss. And Monel was like, oh, man. It's like, oh yeah, you talked to Eve and everything, right? Oh man. She's like, yeah, I was just mad when I found out you and Eve are dating. He's like, oh, why were you mad? She's like, I wasn't mad. It's like, you literally said you were mad 2 seconds ago. She's like, no, I was more so surprised. It's like, well, why would you be surprised or mad or even care? Like, you told me you don't like me. She's like, well, the fact of the matter is you said it, you talked about how much you were so into me and then you immediately start dating someone else. So... But at the end of it all, she was able to kind of finally confess her feelings. Like, as she brought up last episode, the fact of the matter is she's just a little not very quick to open up her heart. Because for her, like, she's so strong when it comes to protecting everyone else, but she doesn't like letting her guard down when it comes to herself. Because it's like, she didn't outright say it, but obviously it was kind of the Jimmy situation because her and Jimmy broke up because it's like for her, she didn't know if she could balance both, like a love life as well as trying to do everything as Supergirl. So for her, like, she didn't feel like she could have everything, so she had to make some sacrifices. So to be the best, she could be at Catco as well as being the best that she could be as a superhero, she felt like she had to let things slide. So she gave up on her relationship to focus more on Supergirl. So Supergirl kind of, even then, that's something even she was asking Clark about. It's like, how do you find that balance? Because when it was all said and done, like, because Clark has that balance. He balances work, having a relationship, and being a superhero. It helps that the person that you're with knows all aspects of your life, So that's why I think that's what makes Clark and Lois such a good team, is because there's no secrets held between them. And, this is just based on Eric, I don't know if it's pronounced Durance or Durance, but she played Lois in Smallville, and I liked her personality because she was very like, yo, I'm gonna do whatever I need to do to get the story, to get the scoop. She had a very kind of like, not necessarily I don't know how to really probably, like, she had a very go-getter attitude, and she was very like, won't let anything slow her, stop her down. And that's what I think that's a version of Lois that I'm very familiar with. Not very familiar with a lot of different versions of. I feel like the Superman cartoon from the 90s, the only way I can differentiate that is by saying Tim Daly voiced Superman in a cartoon. That Lois and the one from Smallville, to me, I can see the correlations. Obviously, they're a little different, but at the same time, I see the mentalities and the personalities are very there. They both are very stubborn. It's one thing I can bring up. So, when it was all said and done, she was like, the fact is that she's willing to, at this time, she does believe she can have everything. And for her, Monel about the kiss, some dude, didn't catch his name. He said it, kind of went over my head. I was like, wait, what? Just randomly popping up. He's like, Kara, I'm in love with you. And it's like, wait, what? They were about to have their moment and you came here and screwed it up. I wasn't expecting it. I was like, it has to be something connected to the people after Monel, which I'm still pushing it. I'll just add it really quickly. If you don't know, just if you haven't listened to the previous ones where I brought it up, I think Monel's a prince, and the fact is that the people are looking for him for that particular reason. Well, no, I don't even have to think about it because I already know that they know it because the episode, what was it, like 2 weeks ago? There was that Dominator that bowed to him and everything, was like, oh, don't hurt him. Like, essentially been like, oh, your highness. So it's kind of like, it's already been established, but I was kind of expecting that to be the thing. Now, whoever this dude is, I don't know which way, either he's magical or he's alien. That seemed more magic related than it did science. Because so far, Arrow's the only one that really kind of brought up the whole magical aspect. Even though Damien Dark's there in Legends of Tomorrow, he doesn't have his magical powers yet. So Arrow's the only one that kind of established, magic. But because along with the lines of Arrow, like there is magic all in the DC universe. So it makes you wonder how much of magic exists in Earth 38. Because I don't think that's popped up on. It definitely hasn't popped up on the Flash yet. But definitely, arguably, I guess you could argue maybe the Philosopher's Stone might count as magic. I'm not 100% sure about that. I'm sure they'll probably look at because the Flash kind of sticks to the more science fictional angle. I mean, all the shows kind of do that. There's not really much of a fantasy element. I mean, it can fantasy and magic sci-fi and fantasy kind of tend to go hand in hand, but that's kind of the way the DC universe is built, at least to my knowledge, where you have characters like Zatanna and whatnot. So the way he popped out, that didn't look like alien to me. That looked like magic. So I was like, oh, are we setting up magic as being a thing on Earth 38? What I'm also interested to find out, is it going to be a situation where it's like, oh, it turns into a thing where Mondo kind of has to fight for Kara for love. Not like Kara needs him to fight for her love, but it's a circumstance of like, it's the only way to kind of settle things. I mean, it'll probably be a situation where Kara's like, I don't need no one to fight my battles for me. I'll fight for myself. Like, maybe it turns into like a three-way situation where it's like a love triangle, but it's like each one of them are kind of fighting for everything. Like she's fighting just to be able to, not have to worry about confining herself to someone else's like, oh, he loves me and everything. It's like, I don't have to worry about that. I love myself. That's enough. I don't need you two fighting over me, which could be what it goes to. I don't know. I could be 100% wrong. It's definitely going to be interesting to see where it goes down next episode. Also to see where this whole Cadmus situation goes, because there was a thing, because I was wondering at the end of the episode we're going to find out that Lena got it, but definitely Lillian got it. She looked at some kind of box and she's like, oh, Lex, I didn't know you completed that. So what that means, I'm not 100% sure. Also, side note, there was that little that plant that was downstairs. In that lab or whatever, in the vault. I keep changing that. I'm sorry. It reminded me of something like, if you saw the original, like I brought it up earlier, the animated Superman cartoon, like in the Fortress of Solitude, there was a level where basically Superman kept all these alien species, like whether it's like animals or plants and stuff like that. That seemed like that might have been something that might have been down there. Obviously that might be something that Lex engineered, or maybe it's an alien plant. I don't know. But to me, my brain instinctually thought of that, like, like that little sanctuary. He has all those different creatures from different planets and like stuff. So that's just where I was going. Another thing, slight note, I keep adding stuff on the end, is I apologize. It does seem like Kara, because last episode I brought up the fact is that Kara seemed like she was okay with Wynn and Jimmy doing the whole Guardian thing. It seems like she's even more so. Obviously, she still had a little bit of her reservations going forward in this episode, just because of the whole like Lena and Jimmy situation of him not trusting her. But now it's kind of a situation of like, no, she does trust him. It's like, hey, let's stop trying to protect each other. It's like, yo, we're just kind of we're colleagues going forward. We're like partners in this whole situation. Let's go back to being friends. You look out for you. I'll look out for me. I'm not going to be too concerned about protecting you. You don't be too concerned about protecting me. It's like, because obviously Jimmy's shown that he can protect himself and handle himself, especially because he's got Wynn as his backup, but he could also have Kara as his backup too. So overall, very good episode. I wasn't really sure exactly how things were going to play out, because I thought it was going to be a situation where Lillian did get to Lena, and then basically Lena's like, no, I'm going to help my mom out. It's like, you went through the trouble of testifying against her and everything, which caught her flack, because some people are like, oh yeah, you took down your mother, and everyone's like, oh, you're a Luthor. Who cares? One Luthor taking down another Luthor, it just shows you can't trust a Luthor, because no matter who you are, family, it's kind of almost what Jimmy said too. It's like, oh, the fact is she's able to do that, betray her own mother. Who's to say she won't betray you? It's like she can do that to her own mother. Who's to say she won't do it to someone else? But nevertheless, it didn't turn out the way. But overall, it doesn't change the fact it's a very good episode. Very interested to see how everything plays out, like I said, especially with the way the episode ended. So. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.